The roller coaster of my 20s was extreme, from the highest high to, going, man, I might be bankrupt, kicked out of this industry, sued by the SEC. Like, if they don't understand what the real story here is, like, this is my whole career. I've gone from the tippity top of the mountain all the way to the bottom, sped run that in 4 years. When you grow up in the woods, somehow everything turns into just a weapon to throw at each other. And not saying getting investigated by the SEC is a privileged problem, but like, this is what's like, oh, I wasn't starving for food here. And you have to be very assured to yourself that, like, the person 2 hours away, 3 hours away is the person you want to be with.
And you both know.
No, I didn't. She did. So I look back on my life and I go, man, it started at this programming thing, and I was into math, and it all sort of coalesced with this finance thing, and then, maybe pure programming wasn't for me. I'm naturally maybe a little bit more driven to talk to people, whatever. The reality is it's all very random, and, put me back at the beginning of life and flip the coin another direction. Who knows where I end up?
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio, and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at Sun Point Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sun Point Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of Sun Point Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory YouTube. My guest today, you might want to think of him as a modern Corey Feldman, kind of everywhere all at once, a real building block to the 80s cinematic universe while stacking Gremlins and Goonies and Stand By Me's. And like this guest is stacking stories on his own journey, but still Corey Feldman, it's cute, but it's not enough of this guest. I need a better Corey, a better looking Corey Woods. No, that's too rough. That's too deep. This guest would never say, peace to cats who rock Mac knowledgeologist, although he is a bit of a Wall Street astrologist. So Corey Haim, yeah, the second Corey, the famous second Corey, a Lucas stacked on License to Drive, stacked on Dream a Little Dream. And this gets us closer to that heartthrob status. Talk about portable movie alpha between those two Coreys too. You got the horror, the comedy, the drama. They had it all. And that's why this Corey, this third Corey, my guest Corey, our bona fide lost boy, a regular wizard of wonders of Dungeons and Dragons, an assassin of dad bods, a modern lover of Caribbean clouds, a man Jason Buck, friend of the show, once described as easily the best person I've ever met on multiple levels. Enough beating around the bush. Let's flirt with my favorite handsome boy model, Corey Hoffstein. Welcome to the show.
I've got an event next week that I'm one of the keynote speakers of. If I could come have you do my intro for me, that would be phenomenal.
I'm pretty sure
that was the best intro I've ever received for anything ever.
Hype Man for Hire is actually, I think this entire thing is just me commercializing Hype Man skills.
Unbelievable.
Happy to do it anytime. We got to talk about this first because I've seen little like inklings of this and I don't know the story. And I know it's a really tricky place for you to start, but is there like some fancy Charizard card? Is there some crazy Pokemon story or something that you have?
No, yes and no, not really. So, by the way, thank you for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here. I think this is a great format and a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. So I grew up in Pokemon era, I guess you could say, middle school when Pokemon got really, really popular. So of course I would be into Pokemon trading cards like every other kid was. I was also I was collecting Magic the Gathering cards. And I remember in one year, I wanted to get my brother a gift for Christmas. And I'd stopped playing Magic the Gathering, and some kid in the schoolyard had gotten one of those holographic Pokemon cards. And then this was all first edition stuff, right? And it was Charizard, which is one of the famous ones or whatever, rare one. And I said, I will give you my whole Magic the Gathering collection for that card. And in retrospect, I think I kind of bullied the kid into it. Not that I was a bully. I wasn't big enough to be a bully, but I think I sort of like pressured him. Like, I showed him how many cards I had, and I was like, I will take all of this for that. And he was like, wow, that's a lot of cards. I don't even know if he played Magic. Anyway, I ended up with the card, and I gave it to my brother for Christmas. And, cut to, I don't know, 25 years later, probably 22 years later, all of a sudden we're going through this COVID bubble, and Pokemon cards, for some reason, I don't know whether there's like the lens of nostalgia. Just a bunch of people in my generation suddenly had a bunch of money that they could waste on stuff. And they're like, yeah, Pokemon, let's go. And Pokemon cards started trading for ridiculous values. I mean, mint first edition Charizards, I think we're going for several $100,000. And I called my brother and I said, please tell me you at least have it in a shoebox somewhere. And he's like, man, I threw that card out so many years ago. And so I was like, well, I just want you to know I did ultimately gift you a several $100,000 present for Christmas when we were in middle school. So I hope you will repay the favor to me someday.
If nothing else, I'm sure the IRS will understand when you
That's
deduct
right.
that from your
Still
state, right?
write off for sure. For
You
sure.
at least get the write-off. Did he remember actually throwing it away? Was there like a recollection of like, yeah, there were boxes of cards that junked or?
Yeah, I mean, look, like who knows what's going to hit and strike? Very funny. So earlier this week, I was at a family get together, and my nephew right now is very into Power Rangers. And my cousin, we were at my cousin's house. He's like, well, actually, my mother has bought the original Power Ranger action figures and has been keeping them in their plastic original containers. And he went downstairs and he pulled out all 5 of the original collectibles. And was like, she thought these would be worth a lot of money. We looked them up on eBay. I mean, they weren't nothing. I think each one was like $250. Shit, it wasn't like this thing she purchased in the early 90s, was worth a gazillion dollars. And he was just like, he gave it to my sister who was with us and was like, please give this to your son. And so it's like, it's one of these things like, who knows which of these old toys, none of them should really accumulate value in the grand scheme. Some of them happen to. When you grow out of a certain phase, you're not thinking to yourself in high school, wow, these little kid Pokemon cards I have, I should definitely keep these because in 20 years.
Just wait.
Yeah, just wait. No, the last thing you want is some girl coming over and seeing your holographic Charizard on the wall. So I think he was very happy to get rid of that thing.
Well, I'm glad he moved on. So take me all the way back. Like, mom and dad, before they have you, like what's going on? Where are mom and dad from? What's the situation there?
Yeah, mom and dad are both from outside of Boston. Met youngish, met in college, married very shortly thereafter, made a pinky promise to one another to never have kids. And about 10 years after that, I think that biological clock hit my mom and she said, no, I lied, we're having kids. And so I've got an older sister, myself and a younger brother. And we grew up in Massachusetts. My father, so my mom was originally a dental hygienist. And then when she had kids, decided to stay at home and raise us. And obviously, anyone who has kids knows that is the most difficult job in the world, right? And then my father was actually an entrepreneur. So he had several businesses throughout my lifetime, all in the tech industry. So at one point, he had one of the largest computer resale businesses in the country that you used to dial up by phone and customize your computer.
Okay, so this is like 90s personal computer.
Yeah, this is like 80s.
Custom builds. 80s custom builds.
Yep.
Okay.
It's called PCs Complete. And then after that, he ended up, which I think he sold to CompUSA eventually. And then he got hired to be the CEO of a firm called Be Free in the .com era, which he ended up taking public and, has all these wild stories. So at one point, the company was trading for just ridiculous valuations that, he was sort of a paper gazillionaire, but ethically he didn't feel comfortable, collaring his stock. So he watches this thing go all the way down to trading like several dollars below cash value on the balance sheet. And he's looking around going, I'm not that bad at my job, And so I've learned so many lessons from him on business and entrepreneurship. And I hope I can ultimately be a quarter of the businessman he was. But, that sort of like entrepreneurship bug was always there and I always watched him. And then he ended up retiring very early, not intentionally. He worked a tremendous amount when we were young. Sort of the joke is when I was a kid, pointed up at an airplane and I said, Dad. Like he just was always on the road working really, really hard, very intense, very focused. We used to call it Hulk mode. He would come home and just be like so ramped up from work. We called it Hulk mode. And then he decided that if he didn't take a pause, he was never going to know his kids. And so at 50, he said, I'm going to take a couple of years off. And then a couple of years turned into a couple more. And then somehow he just never worked again. And what the funny part about that is, like, shortly after stopping working, he cooled off, like dramatically just mellowed as a human being. I think you mellow a little bit as you get older, but he got out of the work environment and he just sort of that real fight that he had in the work environment. He just, everything chilled out a little bit. And so, I meet my wife and I introduce her to my parents and I'm telling these stories about how intense my dad was when I was younger. And she's like, you're so full of shit. Like he's the nicest teddy bear of a man. Like you don't understand. Like he was a little rough. Love him dearly. He's a phenomenal father, but that man was intense and it's just not there anymore. He's just a big pushover. So that's my family story.
That's wild. So, what, like, as a kid, you just have all these memories of just all these different ventures and him just being gone all the time and just being this wild man of business?
Yes and no. I mean, what's funny is when you're a kid, you don't know what's normal.
Right.
So for me, this is just dads would get up early, go to work, come home after dinner, like that's just what dads do. But it wasn't that he wasn't present. He forced himself to be present. So we grew up in Massachusetts. We had a house up on a lake in New Hampshire, and we spent a lot of summers there. Actually, the name of the lake is Newfound Lake, which is the name of my company, Newfound Research. Whole other story. So very meaningful place for my childhood. We would go skiing up in the mountains in New Hampshire when it was winter. We'd go up there in the summer, and he always managed to take time off. And that was back in the era well before cell phones. So we had a house phone that he gave to one person for emergency. So when he was up there, there was no real internet. Like this was pre-internet days, pre-cell phones. So we would go up and he would completely tune the world out for, 2 weeks. And then he'd go back to work and then he might come back. And so like he absolutely made time. He was present. He was a phenomenal father. But in my mind growing up, it's like, no, your parents, whoever's working, just works super intensely. That's just what they do.
Right. That's just the reality of the situation. Yeah. So what's the age difference between the siblings, between sister and younger brother?
Yeah. So my sister is 2 years older than me. My brother is 3 years younger.
Okay. So pretty compact. That's
pretty compact. The big difference, and this, anyone who has siblings will understand this, is my sister and I were 2 years apart in school, but my brother and I were 4 years. So my sister and I had a heavy overlap in those formative high school years where we spent 2 years together. My brother didn't get any of that experience with us. And so there's like that schooling gap was there for a long time, my sister and I were both in college at the same time, my brother. So there's some of that, years that don't seem that big in your 30s and 40s are monstrous in your teens.
I relate to this deeply. This is basically almost the same split as my brothers and I.
Yeah.
I'm oldest with two younger and the same thing. And it's kind of like, I didn't know my youngest brother.
Yeah.
Even though we're not that far apart until we were adults.
Because the reality is, I mean, you put 6 years of school, right? And you go, okay, I'm a senior in high school versus someone who's in 7th grade or something like that. It's just the interest, what you're doing, what you can talk about is so wildly different. And then you get to your late 20s, early 30s, and it's all the same problems. Like, we're back on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. It's an amazing thing. Is there any of the traditional, are you a traditional middle child in any way? Any of that?
I think my siblings would say absolutely.
Of course, as they're obligated to.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's some funny things in my family. I always say the pendulum swings in my family. So, you look at my parents and there's certain genetic traits of my dad. There's certain genetic traits of my mom. And it's sort of like my sister is much more on my dad's side. I'm in the middle. My brother's much more on my mom's side for all the pros and cons, that both sides bring to the table. And so I think genetically I got very middle child. And I think absolutely personality wise, I feel like the slighted middle child who, always got ignored and overlooked. And
it's okay. This is also for
middle childs are. Whether it's true or not, we're going to claim it.
As you should.
Yeah.
All right. So as a kid growing up, I'm guessing mid to late 80s growing up into the 90s.
Yeah. So
Certainly into the 90s.
Yeah. So born 87. So
Okay.
mid-90s.
This is good framing. Mid 90s kid. That explains the Pokemon and Power Rangers awareness.
Exactly.
Like inside of that. So what are the other interests? Like what's elementary school interests? Is it video games and sports, or what's first?
Video games for sure. So sports and video games. Absolutely. I mean, what young man wasn't sports?
What young
and video
man
games
is
playing
not sports
Super
and video
Nintendo
games?
yeah.
All right, is Super Nintendo the first console? Like you're the right era for that?
Yeah. So we had so my sister actually had a regular Nintendo, but and I remember playing a lot of that and continued to play it for long after that thing was obsolete. But the Super Nintendo is the one I really, really remember spending a lot of time on. So yeah, so I mean, we put in sports, all of us organized sports, very young, a lot of soccer. Soccer got massively popular right when we were young. So a lot of towns travel soccer type stuff. And then video games, and I don't know why. I think it was I don't know what the real catalyst was. I suspect if you sort of look at where my life was, it was my dad was very involved in computers. Computers were always around the house because of his job. I lived in I sort of laugh to say rural at this point, but it was a fairly rural town in Massachusetts.
Do you want to shout out the town, or is this a secret?
It's not a secret. Southborough, Massachusetts. And if anyone's
Southborough,
from
okay.
Massachusetts, if they know Southborough today, they wouldn't think it's particularly rural, but
South of Boston or west of Boston?
West of Boston.
West, right?
Pretty
Kind of
much straight,
mid-state.
45 minutes.
I lived in New England for a long time.
Famously south of Northborough,
yeah.
east of Westborough. So
Original.
Yeah. A little bit east of Worcester. People are loving this geographic.
They are.
So when my family originally moved there in the late 80s, early 90s, it was like more cows than people in the town. And then over time, it obviously has gotten.
Wait, why'd they move there? Why does anybody move to Southborough?
Why does anyone move to Southborough? That's a great question. I mean, now.
Then, not now.
I'm just saying now.
Then.
Beautiful schools. I think for my father, the nice thing about Southborough is to actually probably talk about the highways. So it's right on in Massachusetts, 495, Route 9, and you can get on 90 really quickly. And so for him, it allowed him to live somewhere that was affordable at the time. School systems, it's a beautiful town in central Mass. He and my mom both are Massachusetts, natural place to live. And I think quick, wherever he needed to go, whether it was into Boston or around Boston.
All right, well, that's fair. And we're going to come back in a second to the video games because you're going to talk about the computers around the house. But are you straight into travel soccer? Are you part of the whole, we had the World Cup fever that overtakes everything in the mid-90s there in the US.
Yeah, no, that definitely missed me. This was just it's funny the things that you just do as a kid because your parents shoved you into something when you were young and you just don't question it, right? Yeah. I think my parents were like, no, you go play sports, go get your energy out. And then I happened to be pretty good at it, and I got bumped up to what was called the select team, and the select team was the town travel team. It was all the best players in the town of your age, and then you went and competed against all the other towns in the area. So, I look back and I go, well, it's just what I did. I had no rhyme or reason. Did I like soccer? I don't think I knew anything else. It was what it was. That was the sport everyone played until I got to sort of near high school where everyone started to go, oh, maybe lacrosse is the new thing. And we didn't have football. That wasn't really a thing. So soccer was the thing everyone in my town played.
All right, so go baback to the video games now. You started to talk about something about the video games and your dad and these computer parts around your house.
So you're talking about what were the hobbies? I'm putting three things together. Computers were always around the house. I lived in a rural area. My street, there were some other families on it, but it wasn't like this huge cul-de-sac of kids running around and playing together. There were miles between houses. For me to get to a friend's house, it required a car trip, right? So when you were at home, you were kind of stuck alone, unless your parents let you go bike 5 miles to your friend's house. And I loved computers. And somehow all this coalesced in me deciding I was going to teach myself how to program to make video games. And so I taught myself to program when I was 12. and it became an absolute obsession of mine for probably the next 6 years. I still enjoy programming, but I truly thought all the way until I got to college that I was going to go work in the video game industry and program video games. And I probably, if I ever retire, it's what I will do in my part-time. I think video games are this beautiful art to me, and it's probably something I will just dabble in if I ever get the spare time.
Do you think so? And this pegs you like the end of the 90s coming into the 2000s then when you start learning programming.
This would be like 99-ish.
So what are you learning to program on? Like what type of a computer, what type of a language are you learning?
So I originally started with QBasic.
Yeah.
When I say learn, like what's funny about these old learning is like there's no internet.
No.
Dial-up started just after around there. I don't remember having access. It was like I must have had access because I would print off these like FAQs on like how to do QBasic, and someone would be like, this is how you write Pong in QBasic. And I would take it and I'd print it out, and then I'd boot up QBasic and I'd type it in by hand, and I'd try to figure out what different stuff did by changing variables, And then if my parents had this unbelievable policy when I was younger, which was if you would read a book, they'd buy you a book. No questions asked.
Meaning after you finished the book, or if you were like, I pledge to read this book, therefore we will purchase. Okay.
And you couldn't abuse it. They would know whether you ended up reading the book.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So, but they had we want you to be avid readers and learners. And so we will buy you whatever books you want. And so I started asking them to buy me programming books. So I went from QBasic, learning that, to C to C++, and a ton of books that were like learning to program for video games specifically. And that sort of took me through high school. And I think I've told this story on some podcasts before, but like in high school, used to write, back then I went from the Game Boy to what was called the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, yeah.
I used to write games for my Game Boy Advance. I ordered this thing called a Flash ROM that allowed me to write in an emulator on my computer, and then I could flash it to an actual cartridge.
Like a blank cartridge type situation?
And I could bring the cartridge with me and play my own game on my Game Boy, which was cool.
What multiple games, a game? What was the best hit? Corey Hoffstein's joint that all the kids in class are like.
Yeah, it never got that far. Like for me, it was a lot of exploration. I mean, like the easiest stuff to write at that point was like side-scrolling shooters. You're the little ship and there's random things coming at you. That sort of thing. Very trivial to write. There are all these game engines that exist now that like, if someone wanted to program a game, I would say, you don't go program a game engine. You don't need to figure out the underlying, like all of that's pre-created for you now. That didn't exist back then. Like when you read the software development kit that came out for the Game Boy Advance, like you were messing with the internal hardware to figure out how to get sprites to show up on screen. And you're talking about hardware that was severely limited as to like how many things could be held in memory. And so it's like stuff that I just banged my head against the wall. But also, when you live in a rural town in the middle of nowhere on a Friday night, you're not getting together with your friends. It's like, well, what else am I going to do? I'm either going to play video games or make video games. I just ended up making video games, I guess.
That's awesome. Now, favorite games at the time too. Like, where are you peaking out? Like the end of high school. Yeah. What are you obsessed with?
Well, so I definitely younger me was all about Legend of Zelda.
Original?
No, the Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo.
Okay, that was my. Yeah.
And then, what was the one on the Game Boy? Was a big one. Link's Awakening. Man. These are some deep cuts. Link's Awakening. Yeah. So but I was a big Zelda fan for a long, and still am. I just think it's a very, again, I see it as an art. There's certain things that they do that are a real beautiful art to me. Zelda, and then Pokemon in middle school was a big RPG I played. And then as I got to high school, it was like, that's when like Half-Life and Counter-Strike became really popular, and the internet became, you're like, oh, I can all of a sudden play video games where I shoot my friends on the internet. And that's sort of, we were all just getting together playing Counter-Strike, and StarCraft was another big one at the time. It turned from console games to computer games pretty quickly.
the art, just talk about that. Like, what's the art of A Link to the Past that makes you just weepy
Yeah.
inside or whatever it is? Like, explain this to me.
I think for me, it's this brilliant combination of telling a story while giving a person the freedom to explore a world. Like, you're not just telling a story, you're world building. And then the art of a game, in my opinion, is something that's engaging from the narrative. It's engaging from the play style. It's engaging from the puzzles. All of this stuff has to come together. And to me, a really beautiful game is one in which it is mentally taxing. You're solving problems. You're trying to figure out riddles, but it's not like smacking you in the face with math equations. You're going, oh, I never thought to use this item in this way to solve this puzzle. And to me, a really beautifully designed game encapsulates all that. You get lost in this world. You get to be whatever you are in that world. You learn about the world building. You learn about the overall narrative of the story. It tells you a wonderful story. And you get this interactivity that's very active in your brain. And I think a lot of video games historically get a negative reputation for whatever reason for people who've never really played them as not being particularly engaging or a waste of time. There's one game that I an obsession with for a long time called Secret of Monkey Island, which
It's a computer game,
it was a computer game.
like CD-ROM.
It was floppy disk originally, then CD-ROM. LucasArts was the people who put it out. The same people, they did like these, I guess they're called adventure games. They're point and click adventure games where you're
Like Myst or some of the others.
yeah,
Like they're
Myst was sort of an extreme version of this. There was, God, let's see, Day of the Tentacle was another big one from them. There was Leisure Suit Larry. There was
I remember Leisure Suit Larry. He was great.
the other one is man, who's Harrison Ford's what is it really
Han
embarrassing?
Solo?
No, not Han Solo, the other really famous one. Temple of Doom.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana
There
Jones.
we go. Here we go.
Embarrassing for me. So he had a whole series. But anyway, the whole point of these games were they're point and click adventure where there's no shoot 'em up, there's no real dying, there's no fighting. It's purely you're being led through a story and you're hitting obstacles that you're collecting items along the way, and you need to figure out how to put these items together to solve this puzzle. And you might pick up an item, 5 hours ago that suddenly go, oh, if I put it with this and this and this, and oh, I put the rubber chicken on a pulley, I can create a way to go down a zip line. It's like,
Yeah.
it's just, this game was all about pirates. So clearly that's a theme in my life for people who know I pirate themed everything. So I find these games when they can tell a story and engage your mind to be just a unique form of art, right? The same way I'm sure people who love movies see film as a unique form of art and see through all the creative craft that's required to bring something to life. I don't think video games get enough credit for what they are.
Are you self-aware of this at all at that age as a kid? Are you just like, this is really cool and I think there's something more special here?
No, not at all.
No, I don't think anybody is, or very rarely is somebody that.
No, it was not for me that at that age, it was not, I wasn't putting any coherent thoughts around this is a beautiful art form that's getting overlooked. I wasn't like arguing to my parents that I should have more than 30 minutes of video games a day because I'm actually engaging in a beautiful form of art. Like
That buy a book policy. We need to get I promise to play the game you buy me, mom and dad.
No, that was not it. There was still a 30-minute limit every day as to how much I could play. And probably that was the other side of why I ended up programming, because I wasn't allowed to do more than 30 minutes of TV and computer a day.
So the programming was okay. You were allowed to be on the computer if you were working on the programming, not playing the
no video games.
All right. Now, is it a balancing act between these two things? Because and I assume too, it's video games and computer programming you can do at night or on a weekend or on your illustrious Friday nights in rural central Mass. But then is sports just like the rest of time, the rest of social time gets filled up with stuff like this?
Horrific memory, by the way. So my recollection is sports were like, you had your games on Saturday, you had 2 practices on weeknights, and that was
Sounds accurate.
It wasn't until high school that it was, okay, you've got practice every single day and a game on the weekend. Or I guess it was 2 games a week and 4 practices a week. So it wasn't until high school that like athletics really ramped up. But no, other than that, it was, there's not a huge commitment. It was enough of a commitment, I think, for my parents to shove us out the door and say, go do something, be active, other than running around in the woods. But some organized activity, perhaps. But no, it was. I don't think it was overwhelming from a time perspective. And I think that's sort of what happens. I just had a lot of free time, and so I was either going and throwing rocks at each other with my brother in the woods, or spent some time programming.
There's what is lost to society when you haven't thrown rocks at each other or at something.
When you grow up in the woods, somehow everything turns into just a weapon to throw at each other. Pine cones become grenades, sticks or swords and guns. And, if you get a little too rambunctious, you start throwing rocks at each other. But man, we just had like endless woods around us. And I just remember my brother and I would just go and like, just take big sticks and smack them on trees. Like, what else could you be doing with your day? I don't know. What are on a Sunday?
What a great way to spend a Sunday bonding with your family by hitting them with sticks. So I'm curious because you end up taking sports pretty seriously, right? Like in high school?
Particularly.
No.
This ended up, if I'm going to rewind, my sister is off the scale brilliant. And so I'll give you an example. In middle school, we had this thing called the PACE Award, which was like an academic achievements award, and it was given to 4 students every year. And she won it her 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And after she won it 8th grade, they ended up instituting what was called the Jenna Hoffstein rule, which was you were not allowed to win it for multiple years. You could only win it 1 year to allow other kids to have a chance. So she ended up going to a private high school. My parents said, you are very gifted. Would you like to go to a private high school? And so she ended up going to a private high school. And as a competitive younger brother, I said, I can do this. I should be able to do this. I'm not as smart as my sister. She is a genius. But my parents said, if you can get in, you can go. And so I ended up getting into the same private high school as her. Now, when people mostly think about private high schools, especially in New England, they would think of, there is usually some sort of sports culture. The high school we went to was very much the opposite. There was a distinct like arts culture to the school. It was called Concord Academy. I'm not going to hide anything. It's a great, brilliant school, but it did not have a particularly strong sports culture. So to the point where like I started learning to play lacrosse when I was in 8th grade, and I made varsity my freshman year. Like that should not happen. So it was like sports were a part of life. But I ended up being captain of the lacrosse team and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't like, I wasn't going out of my way to go to the best sports school. I wasn't going to, moving to Florida to go play soccer like Jason Buck. I was not gifted like that.
Okay. And I think that was what threw me for the loop. I think I heard about this, like you'll learn lacrosse and then the next thing you're on the varsity team.
Yeah, this wasn't because I was good. This was because the school. I think my senior year, we had the best record the school had ever had, and we like barely broke even on wins versus losses. So this was like
we're really celebrating mediocrity.
Yeah, this was a profoundly good sports school. And the other thing I throw out there is like a lot of people who, if they follow me on Twitter, they see the dad bod, they see me doing a lot of athletic stuff. I think the other thing people need to realize, if they try to put me back then, versus what they see me do today is, today I am, 6'3", 6'4", 210, 215 pounds, work out all the time. When I entered high school, I was 5'3". I then shot up from 5'3" my freshman year to 6 foot over, I think it was between freshman and sophomore year. I came back like, 9 inches taller, and you don't just suddenly put on muscle. No, what happens is you get very tall and very gangly and very awkward because you don't know how to use all this extra room you have. So no, I was not by any means a gifted athlete.
It's funny. It's funny how like just the awkwardness of growth and the opportunity set that's in front of you.
Yeah.
Like if it wasn't that, you would have been totally pushed out of, if it was a heavy athletic school,
Right.
you would have been totally crowded out of that sport or that interest.
Absolutely. And everyone, what's funny is, especially as I got into college, everyone's like, oh, you must play basketball. I was like, no. This height.
Because you're tall and gangly.
Yeah. This height actually has been counterproductive to my athletics for the past couple of years as I learned to reuse my body.
All right. So then, like, as you're approaching the end of high school, you're just on the track. I'm going to be a computer video game designer.
I
or something.
loved it. And again, this private school I went to, they allowed you as a senior to create your own course.
All right.
Which was very cool. So I worked with a teacher there. There wasn't really a computer science class or anything. There was AP. Blanking on this. I think there's an AP computer science that you could do. So there was one computer science class and there was one computer science teacher, and I worked with him and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to create my own. I think it was a year-long study. The first half of the year, I want to develop my own programming language. The second half of the year, I want to develop a 3D game engine. And we did that. I mean, again, this is what I enjoy doing. I really love this stuff. And I said, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a job in this industry. And I decided to apply to the Rochester Institute of Technology because I was very focused. But I was very focused on like pragmatic aspect. I was like, I don't really care about the academics. I like the fact that they're on this quarter system that allows me to go get multiple internships and hooks you up with a job. My teacher was like, RIT, you mean MIT, right? I was like, no, RIT. I'm going to Rochester. And he's like, I think you're making a mistake. I was like, I'll tell you, that's where I'm going. So I was all in on this. And then I get to Rochester, which, by the way, I consider myself, despite the fact it was the wrong school for me, very fortunate because that's where I met my wife. So,
how long were you at Rochester?
A year, but I knew within a month I planned on transferring out.
Okay.
But I met my wife there. So
what was your wife doing at Rochester? You guys the same age?
Same age. She was studying film. So she was a freshman when I was a freshman. And we met freshman year. And that's that. So, and that's that. So probably not the right school for me, but I'm incredibly glad I spent the time there because I ended up that being probably the best grade of my life. And then I said, I don't know what it was. I think I got into classes and got around the people and went, oh, these aren't my people. Like I love this thing, but I don't love these people who I would be around. Like none of my friends in high school gave a crap about programming. None of them were into that stuff. They were athletes, music and theater and whatever. I was the weirdo who was programming. And then when you get a whole bunch of weirdos like me in the same class, I'm like, oh, I don't like this one pair.
Yeah.
I need a little more diversity. And so I said, this isn't what I want to do. And this isn't the school for me. It was too much of that at the school. So I ended up transferring to Cornell University, which is a couple hours away from there. I still kept the computer science degree because I still loved programming. And I just sort of said, I'm already a year in. I might as well finish this out. But then it was sort of like, I didn't know what I was going to do. And finance just sort of fell into it at some point.
Are mom and dad involved at all? Like the guidance counselor story about trying to say like, oh, surely you mean MIT.
Yeah.
Like clearly, young Corey, you've made the mistake. You put an R where the M should be.
Yeah.
Did you have to check in with people to make this transfer? Who helped you with that decision?
Well, my mom was going to kill me because she thought Cornell was the right school long for me. She when I said I was going to RIT, she's like, you at least need to go visit more schools. She's like, I really think Cornell's the right school for you.
Why'd she think Cornell? Like, how'd she know?
She knew it had a good computer science program, right? So you go through the top 5 computer science schools in the country. It's, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon's up there. Cornell is one of the top 5. Cornell is preppy, and I was, and arguably still am, fairly preppy. Right. And so she just sort of said, I think it was within a certain radius of home, right? It was a 6-hour, 5.5-hour drive. So it sort of like fit the criteria. It was, not that Boston is a particularly difficult city, but MIT is a city campus. this is, Cornell's sort of its own remote rural thing. And I think she thought that would fit me better. So probably have to ask her all the answers, but, I think she just saw that as being, of all the things I was looking for, probably the right fit. It wasn't the biggest school in the world. I think it was like 13,000 when I went there, maybe 16,000. I wasn't looking for a 100,000 person school. And I had also just come out of a very tiny private school. So I wasn't looking for the tiniest school. So again, I think it just checked a lot of boxes. Needless to say, I completely ignored her. She actually took me, we drove 5.5 hours there. We went on the college campus tour. And within an hour, I said, I am not going to this school. We can stay and finish.
You declared you planted the
home.
flag. Oh my God.
Happy to stay here and do the rest of the tour with you, Mom. But I'm not going here. And so she said, if you're really serious, we don't have to waste our time. And so turned around and went home. And she ended up being right.
But so do you go hat in hand to her when Rochester isn't working out and say, now Cornell is right? Or how's that actually happen?
No, actually, Cornell was not where I wanted to go. So I knew I wanted out of RIT. And I said to my parents, I want to transfer. And a bunch of friends that had gone to Brown. And
man, that would have been interesting.
They got a pretty decent computer science program. And my friends seemed happy. I said, I think I want to transfer to Brown. And I'll also, you never know what you'll get into. And I'll also apply to Cornell. And I don't remember if I got outright rejected from Brown or whether it was like a wait list. But it ended up Cornell accepted me. And I said, okay, I'll go there. So it wasn't even where I intended to go.
It's like a beacon just pulling you in.
Yeah.
So you get to Cornell. How do you keep, tips and tricks for keeping the long distance relationship alive? You and your wife stay together all through this entire run?
Have a car.
Yeah. That's a lot of hours.
Have a car. Yeah, have a car. Look, you have to, that isn't even the longest. She lived in Los Angeles for a while when I lived in Boston. So we've done long distance. You have to find the pros of long distance and you have to be intent on making it work, right? This was actually pre-FaceTime era as well. So I think it's easier to do long distance today than it was, though I think anyone as they get older is always like, damn kids, they have it, But whenever someone does long distance, I have a huge amount of sympathy. It's incredibly difficult. And you have to make a very conscious effort and you have to be sure that it's what you want, right? And when you're in college and you're both out at parties, like this isn't just a me thing. She's out at parties on the weekend and I'm out at parties on the weekend and you're young and you're drinking, like, yeah, there's a lot of temptation. Let's not lie. And you have to be very assured to yourself that like the person 2 hours away, 3 hours away is the person you want to be with.
And you both know.
No, I didn't. She did.
She made sure you knew.
I'll tell you what, at the end of freshman year, I said to her, well, I'm transferring, this is great. We're great. This isn't going to work. And she said, this is absolutely going to work. And, thank God for her. She was absolutely right. But I would have messed this one up.
That's amazing.
Right.
That's genuinely amazing. So what happens? How's the end of college go? Because you don't quit with schooling. So take me through school and into the next step.
So for me, and again, I wish I had like a really good story. There's no great story. I think at Cornell at the time, finance got really popular.
What year is this? This is like mid 2000s now?
2006.
Okay.
2007. All my friends were going to Wall Street iBanking internships. And I started to get more interested in finance. And I saw the obvious application of computers and finance and automating a bunch of stuff and doing statistical tests. And I didn't even know what quant finance was at the time, candidly. And then I eventually saw, I don't remember when it was pre-blow up. But I saw these articles that started talking about quants and I was like, oh, this is really interesting to me now. This is something maybe I could make a career out of, because all of a sudden I was interested in making money because that becomes a thing as you get older. And so I learned about Carnegie Mellon's computational finance program, which at the time, these programs change over time because they're very work related, but it was all about pricing complex derivatives. So it was a cross-sectional degree, multidisciplinary across math, statistics, computer science and finance. And those 4 programs came together to create this grad program. And when I graduated, it was spring 2009.
Good timing.
I remember the graduation speaker being like, and congratulations, I think it was like 20% of the people graduating had secured a job. And it was like, man, if an Ivy League school, run to the litter, I'll admit, let's be honest, it's Cornell. But if an Ivy League school is only getting 20% placement, like, this is pretty bad. And so I had made the decision earlier the year to go get my grad degree. Very lucky I got accepted. I don't know why they accepted me so young, but I was fortunate they did. And so I went right into Carnegie Mellon to go pursue my master's in computational finance. So I also partially knew if I didn't go get the degree and I started working, I would never go back to school. So I knew I wanted to get it done, but that's the program I went.
Now, like, do you know what a derivative is? Like, what's your actual exposure to this? You're interested in making money, but do you know what a stock or bond is really at this point?
I know what bonds are. I've been in
How? Who told you this? Why?
And this is another one of those great things. I look back, it's funny, as I've become a father, I think about all the things my parents did. When I was very young, my father set up a savings account. Whenever we got birthday money, he would say, whatever money you put in the savings account, we will match. If I saved $20, they'd put in $20. And I wasn't allowed to touch it till I turned 18. And then, or when I was around 13 or 14, he said, all right, now what we're going to do is we're going to take all that money and we're going to open a brokerage account. And we're going to go put it in a diversified equity fund. You're not going to trade it, but every dollar you put in this, we will match. And we want you to know about investing, not just saving, but investing your money. And talk about an unbelievable lesson to teach your kids, and when most people don't have any, finance or ability to do that. So I very early on, my brother, my sister, and I learned what all that stuff was, because my parents hung this incentive out there. It's like, man, I could go work for a summer and make $3,500, and if I put all of that in the stock market, my dad would give me another $3,500. Like, that is wild, and so that's exactly what we did. And, again, we couldn't touch it till we got older, but it gave us that foray into what all that stuff was. But did I really know what derivatives were? No. By the time I got out of grad school, I could price weird structured products and tell you all the math behind a credit default swap. Entering, I'm not sure I could tell you what an option was, but that's what the program really was about, was a 1.5 year fast track of, here's all the math, here's all the statistics, here's what these things are, here's how you price them, here's, all the weird, quirky features of them. Now go work on Wall Street. Except the problem was, all of us wanted to go work on sales and trading desks on Wall Street that had, during our grad program, gotten entirely dismantled. So, I don't think any of my friends that came out of that program work on Wall Street anymore. They all work in different parts of the industry, or some of them have left the industry. But all the jobs we intended to go get, go be a desk quant on a desk that was doing credit default swaps, gone entirely. All the internal hedge funds we wanted to work at, spun out, gone entirely. And if you go look at that program today, half the courses I took don't even exist anymore because they're not relevant to what's going on in the industry.
It's so weird that college isn't to get a job. It's kind of like to learn how you learn and how to apply that, because you're going to get dumped out into some mess that.
In 2008, 2009 was some mess for sure.
Some mess indeed. So while you're learning all this stuff, you're a video game boy. Of course, you're playing with stuff. What else are you coming up with while you're learning about all this derivative pricing and model building?
Yeah. So if we rewind a little bit, this is, again, I think I took all the time and energy that I put into video games and making video games. That sort of stopped when I got into college a little bit. Probably after freshman year. I took all that energy and I put it into investment models, exploring different ideas on how to build investment models. Some of them entirely laughable in hindsight. Others still, in my opinion, novel and interesting.
Do you have a good laughable one? Can we get any laughable example that comes to mind of something you're like, that is the dumbest thing I ever came up with?
No, nothing really. Just, all the I think a lot of people start with the low hanging fruit, which is like, oh, let me create all these technical indicators and I'll find some secret combination that'll be the unlock, and I can obviously come up with the perfect stock screen, right? But, other stuff that I look back on that I sort of laugh at is like, I was doing quant equity where I would figure out which of these company characteristics were forecasting relative returns relative to other, before I even knew what quant equity was, right? And so it's funny, is like I was doing all this stuff and I was like, I looked back and I was like, oh, that's what quants were doing out there. They were doing it much more sophisticated and robust. And there's a whole bunch of stuff I was doing wrong. But the basic idea was, I kind of stumbled into a lot of these ideas myself. Trend following was another one that I stumbled into myself. And what I ended up doing, and this is where my career and life just takes a very weird turn, is I ended up building these novel trend following models in 2007, 2008, with the whole idea of portfolios shouldn't be long only. They should have the flexibility to go to cash, right? This was going into the 2008 crash. I got introduced to a local asset manager in Boston. I'm going to make a very long story short in the interest of time, who said, this is interesting. Can I license this from you? Broke college student, going to grad school. Absolutely. Set up a data licensing agreement. I'm going to shove it in this company called Newfound Research, named after a lake I grew up on in New Hampshire, because who cares? This company's going to be out of business in a year and I'm going to go work on Wall Street. And I'll license this to you. How do you want to pay me? And this guy says, I'll pay you in basis points. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I don't think I knew what a basis point was at that time. While I'm in grad school, he ends up getting a sub-advisory gig running mutual funds for Virtus Investment Partners, and his assets under management go from 0 to over $1 billion. And next thing I know, my tiny little company has some decent cash flow, and I'm going, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And like an arrogant early 20-year-old, I said, and clearly I've got this all figured out. First, I didn't even try, and I'm making money. And so I said, I can always go back and work on Wall Street. Why go get one of these 80-hour-a-week internships at a bank when I can go work for myself? And so that's what I did. It was the best, worst thing I've ever done. I've been fortunate, and then I've stuck it out and turned it into I would consider it to be a fairly successful business today. But there were some dark years, and I was an arrogant early 20-year-old who really thought he was master of the universe that really had it all wrong in many, many ways.
Okay. We have to unpack some of this story just because it's so interesting. So you're making these models. How do you meet the guy for the first time where this is even a conversation? How does he discover you exist in this world with this model?
So one of the things I did in college as an internship is I helped my father's financial advisor had a dear friend who was an asset manager, solo practitioner running about $40-50 million in separately managed accounts, who really needed an intern. So through that connection, I interned for him, and they were both in the same office park. And so I would go at times sit in on meetings at the financial advisor's office when he was interviewing different asset managers. Some opportunity to listen to different asset managers pitch and tell their story and ask PMs questions. And so, just sort of a learning process. And this was one of the asset managers who came in. I wasn't so audacious as to talk about what I was doing, but after I left, I guess my father's financial advisor at the time spoke to him and said, hey, you have this interesting idea. This kid, this intern has been working on this thing for his own, he's showing me what he's working on. I think what you do and what he does could be really interesting together. And so that's how the connection got made.
So it's your dad's financial advisor who knows the asset manager that kind of just puts this together just on pure goodwill. Just you're excited and interested and interesting.
Yes. Pure goodwill and serendipity of life, I suppose.
Right. You were in the right meeting on the right day at the right time. That's pretty wild. And then setting up the business initially, is this a legal Zoom job? Is this you go to dad and say, give me your attorney?
What? No. So again, if there's a theme here, what's interesting is like my parents, there was always a safety net, which I know is a huge luxury that a lot of people didn't have. There's always a safety net, but they always said like, figure it out. You're an adult, go do it. We trust you to do this. Like when I said I wanted to go to RIT and my mom said, no, like MIT or Cornell, they didn't fight me. They didn't say, no, you can't go. They said, it's your life. If that's really where you want to go, we trust you to make these decisions. So it was, again, in working with my father's financial advisor, he introduced me to a lawyer he was working with and said, we'll set up the company, we'll all own some equity, and we'll toss this lawyer, a small percentage of the company because this is a regulated industry and we just want to really make sure he's incentivized to make sure we're doing this all correctly. Again, pure serendipity, that lawyer ended up becoming my business partner for the last 16 years. Incredible entrepreneur, incredible lawyer. I've learned so many lessons from him. Just pure chance I got introduced.
And same thing, because of the revenue share, the ownership split, like that bound you together at the beginning of this process.
Yep.
In that pure serendipity. And now
Yes.
you're 16 years on, still doing business together.
Yeah. Well, he's older. And so he's sort of was like, I'm ready to move on with my life.
Sure.
So I recently actually bought him out of the business, but it wasn't like an ill will thing. It wasn't like we ever were colliding. It was that he just.
Natural course of life. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So obviously you license this deal, the asset management company grows to the moon. You're fabulously wealthy. Everyone recognizes your genius. Nothing bad has ever befallen you. And you're here from your castle on Mars, right?
Yes, that is exactly how the story goes.
Do it.
Thank you for making it so succinct. Yeah, so I've actually only ever told this story one other time. So I'm gonna keep this brief, but what happened over the next couple of years after I initially signed that contract is he kept growing dramatically. From 2008 is when I signed the contract. He was zero. By 2011, he was 7 billion, 8 billion. Very quickly, as soon as he got the sub-advisory agreement and he started raising assets, we struck a new deal. He said, this is going to grow. We need some sort of breakpoint deep. Like we can't pay you as much as we were. Great. I said, I will give you breakpoints. You agree you can't fire me. So we're locked for life. And he said, the last thing I asked for is exclusivity and non-disclosure. You can't tell anyone I'm your client. So now imagine I'm an early 20-year-old running around trying to drum up business saying, I run these investment models. I have a client who uses it to power several $billion, and I can't tell you who it is. And that is a horrible sales pitch, right? And so needless to say, it was not overwhelmingly successful. And it wasn't overwhelmingly successful for a variety of reasons, right? Of just being a young entrepreneur who had no idea what he was doing and no idea how to do sales. And, we made the business work, but a lot of it was just floated on the back of this other company, just giving us really good cash flow while we tried to figure out everything else. By 20, man, I'm going to get my years wrong here because this was so long. A lot of stuff happens. Eventually what I end up figuring out is that over time, this firm went from claiming that they were effectively using my model in a back-tested hypothetical fashion to it wasn't back-tested, it wasn't hypothetical, that they somehow claimed a live track record going back to 2001. And not only that, they had taken a whole bunch of signals I had sent them and implemented them incorrectly. So the back test they ran was miscalculated. I think it was 2013. It might've been 2012 that the SEC finally went in for a routine audit, said, hey, can you give us evidence of track records? And he points at me and I'm like, dude, I was 12. I was 14 in 2001. What are you talking about? And needless to say, the whole thing came crashing down. Now, the wildest part, there's a lot of wild parts. The wildest part was that When the SEC went in there, the entire industry was talking about it. He still managed to go from 10 to 25 billion. They grew $15 billion during an SEC investigation. And it wasn't until after they received a Wells notice that money started flying out, and then they basically went bankrupt shortly thereafter. Now, as you can imagine, during an SEC investigation, the SEC wants to talk to everyone. And so at the ripe old age of like 24, 25, I get a subpoena to go sit down in Boston in front of 13 SEC lawyers. And I will tell you, I have a very healthy respect for the SEC from that experience. They are very talented people. I know a lot of people drag regulators, and I know regulation can be tough to deal with. These are very smart lawyers who were very quickly able to piece things together from what was, a lot of hand waving and misdirection attempts.
How easy was it? And I say this firmly, so I remember this going down. I'm already in the industry. I remember this product because I'm familiar with going through the crisis at the beginning of my career and saying trend following and relative strength and these things make sense. And here's this product that's actually doing it. And this seems really smart, and not knowing you're the wizard behind the curtain. But then I remember and probably it makes sense now I'm thinking about it. It must've been around that 3-year number and then the 5-year number with the investigation going, and this thing is just exploding and everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it comes down to this.
Yeah. I think what was really interesting about it was the product itself. Anyone who I've ever met who invested in the product was product worked. It did exactly what it said it was going to do. And we were happy with our experience. And there's a reason it kept raising money. And I don't think anyone was hurt from a financial perspective, right? It was just what they ended up getting nailed on was advertising fraud. They were advertising a false track record as being live. It was mischaracterized as live, and it was miscalculated. It was overinflated. If you take a trend following type signal and you apply it a week early, it's like having a crystal ball. And they just had inflated, those numbers. And so, yeah, it's hard to have a product be $25 billion in assets in an industry and not have it touch a lot of parts of the industry. And so, they did their best. There were 160 people at peak. They did their best to run around and tell people it wasn't their fault. And, a lot of the people believed internally that it wasn't their fault because none of them knew me. We were kept at a complete arm's length. They were told that it was, and then at some point it was oh no, some kid lied to me. And the truth eventually came out. But at that point, a lot of people had moved on. These investigations take years. The lawsuit of the SEC against the ex-CEO, I don't think went to trial until 2018. It's just funny. It's this at one point in my life, I knew these dates cold. I'm glad I've forgotten it all. Gone. But yeah, it was, my late 20s, 24 to 29. This was my entire life.
Are you already married at this point?
No. In fact, so the SEC originally didn't know what to make of me and my business. And it was a big question of the earnings I had, were they misgotten gains? So there was a potential chance that the SEC was going to turn around and say, you need to pay every penny back, which would have bankrupted me, right? Because if I paid every penny back, but don't forget, I've paid taxes. So I have half the money, right? And if they were asking for every dollar back, I would have been by definition bankrupt. And so I said, I was very serious with my girlfriend, now wife at the time. And I just said, first of all, I'm in a foul place mentally, just a very dark place to go through this for years on end, to keep getting called into the SEC, to be badmouthed in the industry. Really, I was blackballed from events. It was very dark. A lot of people thought I was guilty. It's one of the reasons actually we started publishing so much, was to say, no, there's real intellectual. This is where the intellectual thought lies. But it was just a very dark place for me. And so I ended up saying to my girlfriend, I don't want to get married until all this is wrapped up. And what's really funny is I became very close with my lawyer. Really, really phenomenal lawyer. And she, at a certain point after a meeting with the SEC, said, Corey, I need you to leave the room. Kicks me out of the room And I guess she said to the SEC, you are keeping this young man from getting married. You either need to tell him whether you're pursuing charges against him or let him be. Not that long after they said, no, we got nothing on you. Go get married. Which I thought was kind of funny, but yeah. So no, it was not me.
Was that, and I mean, I can only imagine the stress of going through that period and just wondering how this is all going to turn out. So this is that 24 to what age are you in this?
I mean, this all dragged on for a long time, right? So there was,
Yeah.
So let's see. So I think 2013 to 2015, the SEC was initially, it might have been 2012 to 2014, initially investigating the company. This company's called F Squared, by the way. I'm not trying to dance around it. So they were,
These are all public records at this
These are all
point.
public records.
Yeah.
and then the F Squared, and then they pursued a case against the CEO, the ex-CEO at that point, which took, I think, another 3 years. But then the F Squared entity went bankrupt. And when there's a bankrupt entity, they owed us a lot of money because they've stopped paying us. So we filed a claim, and then the trustees enabled the lawyers to then go try to get back money from everyone. And of course, we were the people who'd been paid the most. And so they turned around and tried to sue us under the same claims they had initially tried to say, oh, you guys defrauded the company. You need to pay everything back. So then I was in a lawsuit with them, both personally and at the corporate level, which dragged on 4 years, I want to say. And then finally we settled that out of court. It's funny. People haven't been sued. They always think, well, if you get sued and you did nothing wrong, you should fight it. They don't understand what it's like to get sued. They don't understand the cost of being sued, and they don't understand the mental drain. And at a certain point, I just said, I just need this done with my life. My partner wanted it out of his life. And we just said, let's just go to get mediation. We'll drop some of our claim. They'll drop their suit against us. We took our monetary claim way down. I mean, it just sort of was like, I just need this done with my life. So we figured all that out. And then we still had a claim, and we did eventually get paid out. I think we got paid out over a decade after the company went bankrupt. So I don't think it fully wrapped up in my life until 2023.
Lawyer steps in and says, now it's time for you to get married.
Yeah. No, so I did
Along the way.
I did eventually get married in, it was 2017.
Yeah. But that is crazy to think about. Like getting sued for something where you're not actually in the wrong.
Right.
And back to this, like,
I mean, one of the interesting things you learn through all this is like this sword and shield aspect of lawsuits, right? And when my business partner, when we originally made a claim, and again, I was so lucky my business partner was a corporate lawyer, I said, why are we bothering with this claim? Like, they're bankrupt. There's no money. Like, and lo and behold, there was some money that ended up getting clawed back, but nowhere even close to our claim. I said, why bother with all this? Like, can we just move on? And he said, no, this is our shield. Because they're going to turn around and try to claw back money from us. They can't just outright deny our claim. We have a claim. Documented what they owe us. So what's going to happen is they're going to come after us. And then this is going to be our trading horse, basically, that we have this big claim that we can, get rid of this. And that's how it happens. And so it's just fascinating. You look back on things in your life and you go, man, that was a real drag. I mean, the roller coaster of my 20s was extreme, from the highest high to, going, man, I might be bankrupt, kicked out of this industry, sued by the SEC. Like, if they don't understand what the real story here is, like, this is my whole career. I've gone from the tippity top of the mountain all the way to the bottom, sped run that in 4 years. Thought very seriously about leaving the industry, but you learn. I look back on it and I go, man, like, incredibly formative lessons, just things I know because of things I've experienced that, I hope the majority of people never have to go through. And in the grand scheme of things, these are not like, let's be honest here. Like these are privileged problems. Like, and not saying getting investigated by the SEC is a privileged problem, but like, this is what's like, oh, I wasn't starving for food here. Like, let's be honest. I do want to couch all this.
How old were you when you first got investigated by the SEC?
I'll tell you perspective around this, but I do hope most people don't end up having to deal with that in their business life. But you learn some really fascinating things going through that experience. Some just lessons that stick with you, and it's hard to say where they all play out always. It's I don't always consciously know, but in the back of my head, I'm always thinking of those sort of things and how I think about contracts now and how I think about regulators, and it's just a very different view than I think a lot of my peers have.
So how's the business evolve? You come out of that, you start publishing the extra stuff. You still have this partner who's committed to going, well, that's dead, but we have this other business we have to run. How do you start bubbling up? I feel like it was the blogs and other stuff where you're all of a sudden on my radar, giving yourself the distance from the prior, now public employer and saying, we actually have good work here.
So $25 billion basically starts looking for a home, right?
Right.
And a lot of that money, at that point, people had learned who we were. And a lot of people, we basically said there's an opportunity here for us to go after this. And then this was interesting. Another, in hindsight, interesting business lesson came out of this. But we still had arguably a contract with the entity that we didn't want to violate that had a non-compete. So we had to figure out creative ways to try to, for similar services that weren't identical. And then we had copycats who were trying to offer identical services to what we had offered. And people were coming to us saying, well, why don't you just offer the real thing? And we're like, we can't technically, legally, trying to do the right thing. So we ended up picking up probably $700-800 million in that. But the reality is, and again, you came out of the crisis, these tactical asset allocation strategies were wildly popular for the first 4 or 5 years post-crisis. And then as the 60-40 just became unbeatable, demand for that type of product just went downhill. Every whipsaw was another 20% of your assets gone. And there was just never an event that catalyzed to allow you to show your downside protection. It was just every whipsaw bounced back too hard for a decade. And so it didn't take long for that to whittle down. And part of what happened is we said, okay, we want to make this available in every format that it used to be. So we launched mutual funds mid-2013 and 2014. We had separately managed accounts on different model platforms. I mean, we really ran very fast to make all of this available. We did model delivery to a bunch of TAMPs, if that means anything to certain listeners. You'll either know that or don't.
And if you don't, good for you.
But we really set up very quickly, went from being a research provider to an asset manager. And in that transition said, we need to start establishing ourselves and establishing that brand. And so we started writing a weekly research note. And I think I wrote a weekly research note almost every single week from 2014 through 2020. And when I say research note, I don't mean like, here's what happened in markets. I mean like, hey, let's explore how to apply, value signals to the credit spread on bonds. Like just weird esoteric. There's a huge library of old posts there that every once in a while someone will ping me about, which is fun. But that sort of helped me establish a brand in the industry. Twitter was really popular. That was an era blogs were really big. Sort of led by like the Barry Ritholtz and Josh Browns of the world. Post 2008 blogs were still really popular up until about 2015. Then I started transitioning into podcasting probably around 2017. That's been its own adventure. But I mentioned a business lesson before. I think one of the things we did was we didn't stop and ask ourselves, how should we innovate on these products? There was so much money in motion. We just said, what can we do to keep these products the same and capture that money? And the problem was those products were slowly going out of vogue. And the people who were willing to allocate to us kept telling us they didn't want the products to change, but it was impossible to raise new money. And I don't think I can go back and teach myself a business lesson. It was like, I was stuck in a product that was relevant from 8 years prior. And I wasn't thinking about what products were going to be relevant going forward. And so just in many ways, we just saw assets slowly dwindle over time. And so we eventually have made some hard pivots in the business and totally redone things and taken lessons learned and launched new product. And I think it's been a very successful venture in the new suite of stuff. But it was like we initially captured this big group of assets and watched 700 million sort of go down to 200 million over a 5-year trajectory.
How's that take you to today? Like, what's the through line to the business that you have going on now?
Yeah. So funds that were less popular, we shuttered. Post 2020 was probably the biggest blow. So I had won a very large client mandate of a similar vein. It was a $700 million mandate with a firm called United Capital. They got bought by Goldman Sachs probably a couple months after, when was it, May? Probably June 2020. I got a call that basically said, look, we don't believe in tactical asset allocation as a category. Every manager on the category is getting fired. This is your 90-day notice. All $750 million will be redeemed from you. At the time, my father had been diagnosed with lymphoma. He's fine now, but I'm dealing with my father with the potential deadly cancer situation. It's COVID. I went from $1 billion+ to a phone call that said, by the way, you're going to be at 250 million. I'm suddenly having to think about laying off employees. And I just said, I'm tired and I'm done. And I don't think I want to do this anymore. And my business partner said, why don't you're probably going to stay in this industry. Like you love this. You're just very tired. Why don't you go semi-dormant? So I'd written at the time this research piece called Liquidity Cascades that went pretty viral. And I was doing my, I think, third season of the podcast, and I had lined up Cliff Asness as a guest. And I decided that was going to be the final episode, and that was going to be the end. I was just like that. When I was deciding that, I thought I was going to just be done and just hit. I'd written a goodbye letter. I was like, I'm just leaving this industry. I've had enough. I was going to have I was going to publish the paper, have Cliff be the last thing. I was ready to take the website down with just hey, thank you so much. Here's the Calvin and Hobbes comic where I ride the sled off into the sunset and appreciate everything. And I'm out of here. And my business partner just said, look, the reality is you're probably coming back in a year or two. You've worked very hard. Why don't you just keep everything alive right now? People who are allocated still clearly want what you do. You just got to sort of figure out, the next line of passion. And so that was really good advice because I didn't have to tear everything down and rebuild the whole platform when I wanted to get started again. And it took me probably a good year to sort of sit back and think about what was next. Like take those lessons of stop offering a product that people wanted a decade ago and a small cohort of people want today, and take all the lessons you've learned about how you think products should be built, how you think it should be delivered, what makes a good investment strategy versus what makes a good investment product, and think about the business of running an asset manager to actually make this possible. And so that all culminated or got accelerated with another paper I wrote in concert with my colleagues at Resolve Asset Management on this concept called return stacking. And it was something I had originally started talking about in 2017, this idea of capital efficiency and using leverage to layer alternatives on top of your strategic portfolio. I said I thought it was the future of ETFs in 2017 in a Barron's article. No one ran with it. And so then I wrote this return stacking article with the team at Resolve, and the feedback was phenomenal. And I said, hey, you moron, maybe you should run with this idea. And so we did. And so since 2023, it took till 2023 to actually get the first product out the door for a couple of reasons, but we launched the first product in 2023. We now have 6 ETFs in the return stack ETF suite. We went from 0 to north of 850 million in under 2 years. And so far it's been a pretty resounding success. Right. I think so. So that's where we're at today.
Do you think, thinking back to where your dad was at your age and thinking back to where the ages that your kids are now, do you think they're going to have, obviously not the experience of pointing at the plane and saying, that's dad. What are you trying to bestow on them like he bestowed on you the best of it? That's not the Hulk.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I watch him with my kid now, and it's like, man, he's just such a teddy bear pushover. He likes to call grandchildren the dessert of life. Mm. I learned a tremendous amount from him, business wise and work ethic wise, and so I want my kids to see me work hard. But I think I'm also in a bit of a different position than he is, where there were things he wanted in life that I'm less aspirational about.
Like what?
There was a lot of like, I want to, I want to make a lot of money so I can build a big house. I want to make a lot of money so I can drive a fast sports car. And I am probably a lot less objectively materialistic than he is. I want to make money so I can support my family and I can, give them everything they need and all that sort of stuff. But I will absolutely give up money to spend more time with, my kids and my wife. So I think I maybe, I wouldn't call it healthier, just a different balance of like what I want out of life. So, he went to an office and wore a suit every day. And that's part of being in the 80s and 90s. Like, I recognize culture has changed.
Sure.
But I've set up my life and my business so that we're all remote and I can work from home so that I can play with my kid at lunch, because that's important to me. So there's things like that I very much hope I can pass down half the business lessons he's taught me. I actually, for his 60th birthday, wrote a book called Lessons from My Father that were all the business lessons that he wrote. He's taught me, and I made physical copies, and I have a physical copy that my kids will read someday if they don't end up getting the advice from him personally. There's so many things that he just sort of dadisms that he drilled into my head over time that just come up whenever I'm thinking about business. He just
Give me an example. Give me like one dadism that comes to mind when you think about it.
Let's see. There's the obvious dadisms, like not fair, but that's not really shit what I'm talking about.
No. And give me some good.
Man, when you're on the spot, it's like,
Yeah, it gets really hard.
this is funny because there's a book of like 15 of them. Now it sounds like I wasn't listening to them.
I know, yeah.
Things like around negotiations. Like, I think when
Okay.
I was younger, right, I always thought negotiations where you were trying to maximally extract everything from whoever you were working with. Ignore that. I'm going to give you a really good one. I'm going to give you a really good one. Here's something he said to me. In business,
All
never
right.
say no. Never say no. If someone wants you to do something, you don't say no to them. You simply say what it would take for you to say yes. So if someone has a ridiculous request, I have people ask me to launch ETFs all the time for them that are like, hey, I really wish you had this version. And I say, I will absolutely launch it for you. You're going to seed it with $100 million, right? Oh, no? Come back to me when you have $100 million. I never say no. The answer is never no. It's yes, and this is what it will take to do it. And it's little things like that like, I don't know why, but those little reframings really add up, because eventually, like, sometimes you say a ridiculous, like, someone asked me to consult for them once, and I was like, I don't consult. That's not what I do. And instead of just saying no, I was like, sure, I'll consult for X dollars, like expecting them to say no. And they said yes. And then that consulting job ended up turning into a multi-$100 million mandate. So not only, and if it had just ended with the consulting job, that was fine, because I thought I was getting massively overpaid for what I was doing, but it opened an entirely new door that wouldn't have been there if I had just said outright no. So the lesson is just say no. The other one that I use all the time is people get very angry very quickly. And for him, he said the best revenge in business is just laughing all the way to the bank. Like, just, put your ego, put your pride aside. When someone's insulting you, when you're negotiating, just do whatever it takes. Let them insult you. Let them put you down. Let them do whatever. The best revenge is just laughing all the way to the bank. And so I keep that one in mind a lot too. So those are two that he said to me that I don't read. Like, the ones I put together are not cliche things I've ever read in a business book per se. They were just things he said to me over time. Now, it's very funny, going back to way earlier in the conversation. I put this book together when he turned 60, and I showed it to my brother and my sister, and my brother and my sister were like, when did he ever say this?
Yeah. What dad did you have?
Dad did you? And I was like, well, we clearly got different lessons from our father.
Right. My siblings and I had a fun conversation where we all realized we had like entirely different experiences and stuff like this.
Yeah.
We're like, wait, what was that color light like for you? No experience
I
like
talked
this.
to like my brother, right? As mentioned, was 4 years
Oh yeah, totally.
younger than me, right? My father was retired for his entire like middle
Right.
school and high school. And he's like, it was horrible having dad home the whole time. Just like a very different experience. Whereas for me, I was like, I got him to be home for the last 2 years of high school. And I was like, this is great, except for him.
Yeah.
Actually, this is kind of funny. He used to show up at my high school in biking spandex and purposefully refill the water in my cafeteria
Awesome.
in his biking spandex just to do it to me,
Fantastic.
And I hated it. And now I think to myself, I want to do that to my kid.
So bad.
Yeah.
So bad. Such a better rite of passage than an SEC audit.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We got some notes. We got to work through some notes. I'm keeping you just a little bit longer. I invite you to freely interrupt me as we go through this. And I'm going to start right with your dad from at the beginning. Just this idea of, I think you said you watched him go from having a business that was worth $1 gazillion to being below cash and actually asking himself, like, I'm not that bad. This lesson of being present that I feel like you got from him, and then you're kind of wrapping it back in at the end here. It's really cool.
I mean, I don't think I was aware of those things when I was younger.
Oh, definitely not.
He maintained in a very impressive, again, as I go through this as I get older, an incredibly impressive arm's length. Like, I don't need my kids to know about the business. I learned lessons now. Like, there were times he was getting sued. I had no idea. No, my mom, my dad shielded us from that entirely. And so there's, I didn't know that stuff at the time, but as I look back, it speaks to me of his character and my mother's character and the family they were trying to build in. And so it's all, as I'm getting older and having children of my own and seeing these lessons that I didn't even know were lessons until I really think about them. It's just, you learn to appreciate certain things about your parents over time, or not, things you don't want to do the same way. But, I think in the case of my parents, I feel very fortunate. There's a lot more I want to copy from them. And overwhelmingly more than I want to copy.
Yeah. And that's a magical thing because it speaks to the experience that they curated versus like the actual, the little individual things. I would be disappointed to know because we know the Jenna Hoffstein rule, is there a Corey Hoffstein rule of lacrosse captaining at least? Did anything bear your name?
Nothing got my name.
Not a thing.
Not a thing. Not a thing. I think I think the school, frankly, was disappointed with me because, these private high schools, they very much pride themselves on their placement rates into college. And having a kid that was probably a pretty decent shoe-in at MIT choose to go to RIT, they're like, you're hurting our numbers. Why are you doing this to us?
Yeah. What is this?
So I think they were ultimately rather disappointed in me as an alumnus in what I did to their numbers.
Welcome to the disappointing alumnus club. The computer finance opportunity. I loved how you talk about it. Just like this is a thing, this Carnegie Mellon thing. Learning to price a derivative, learning about the telling a story while giving the freedom to explore video game thing. I just feel like there were all these worlds aligning, even if you couldn't see it at the time. The willing to focus on this stuff was all just swirling around you till it slowly came together. How do you think about that?
I don't remember who it was. I heard once that we do ourselves a disservice when we tell history starting at the beginning and going to the end, because it sounds like everything's a natural conclusion. When in reality, at every point in time, there's so many things that could happen. But the way we tell it, it's like, and then this happened, as if it was an obvious outcome, right? So I look back on my life and I go, man, it started at this programming thing, and I was into math, and it all sort of coalesced with this finance thing, and then, maybe pure programming wasn't for me. I'm naturally maybe a little bit more driven to talk to people, whatever. The reality is it's all very random, and put me back at the beginning of life and flip the coin another direction, who knows where I end up or how I end up. So I always feel like there's a bit of a disservice when I tell my story, if I get the opportunity to tell my story, and telling it in the sequential order. I should probably tell it backwards, and people can figure out if they're really was any thread of connection. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And I think this ties into the goodwill and serendipity thing in particular. There's the value in telling the stories through without ignoring like the really truly dreadful pitfalls that make it not linear. It might be linear in time, but it's
Right.
not linear in the experiences.
Right.
And you can't run into like, you don't have, without the business partner that you accidentally get, basically.
I don't
You
survive.
accidentally get.
I don't
You don't
survive.
You don't survive. But now when you're 24 getting subpoenaed by the SEC, you have this person who's right there by your side
Yes.
going, explaining the whole like sword and shield philosophy to you.
Yes. And someone, again, who's a corporate lawyer, so taught me how to read contracts. Like I probably, and I probably would make insulting to anyone who's actually a lawyer, but I would probably make a half decent lawyer at this point. Like I just got a law school education through osmosis of being business partners with him for 15 years. When you have an incredibly talented corporate lawyer, he runs laps around me, but the bit I got probably makes me a half decent junior lawyer, frankly. And again, just pure luck.
Pure luck, pure experience, and seeing, and I guess again, this is the value of capturing an entire story like this and you sharing the journey and all the steps along the way. It's inside of the story, your ability to explore those things.
Right.
And that means stuff goes wrong.
Yeah. And look, I mean, a lot of stuff goes wrong all the time. And I think if you don't take the time to explore that stuff, there's no lessons learned. And sometimes there's not always a good lesson. Sometimes it's just bad luck. But I like to reflect on, like, you can't just say good stuff is talent and bad luck is bad luck, right? It's got to go, at least in my view, it's like there's a little bit of alpha edge, hopefully, and then there's a lot of good luck and a lot of bad luck. And hopefully you're taking advantage of good luck and minimizing that impact of that bad luck, both practically and psychologically, candidly. Because I'm going back to that point of like 5 or 6 years of just really gnarly stuff going on in my life. I'm very grateful I came out the other side. I feel still pretty well balanced and happy, right? But I recognize like it didn't have to go that way. I could have gone to a very dark place and never gotten out of it. So, I credit my wife, credit my family. They helped keep me going through all that. But yeah, probably need some therapy. But we'll see where that bubbles up.
Well, like the unfortunate alumni club,
Yeah.
the therapy club here is waiting with loving arms.
That's right.
Corey Hoffstein, tell the people where to find you if they want to learn more, if they want to check out what you're doing now.
Yeah. I am overly active on Twitter, I guess X now, and we're calling it X. So
Elon's X.
Elon's X, at C Hoffstein is where you'll predominantly find me. You'll find most of what I'm working on from an industry perspective at returnstacked.com.
Beautiful. Corey Hoffstein, thank you so much for your time today. You are truly an intentional investor.
Matt,
I'll see you
a
all soon.
privilege. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.